for that presentation and that introduction. It set the scene very well. So it is my pleasure now to introduce our second speaker, Dr. Seung-Hee Tan, who is currently Executive Director of CropLife Asia, and today he's going to talk to us about the growing interest in biopesticides and give an industry view on that market, and he may actually be able to answer some of our questions before or have an opinion on that. Seung-Hee, can you unmute yourself, and if you'd like to put on your camera, you're most welcome.
Both on unmute and can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. Alison, thank you again for inviting me to speak today on the biopesticide issue. You actually got me scrambling back to my university days because my first graduate project was on bacteriophage, which I was screening for against Pseudomonas solanacearum was my first program. The second program when I went to Japan was a attenuated virus that we fully launched onto the field, and is effective and is right now still being used in Japan as we speak and help protect the melon industry. So those are the two R&D pieces that go to market that I have that I can probably share later on. So thank you again for inviting me. I work for CropLife. Next slide, please. CropLife Asia, as we pull out the slides, is a non-profit organization that promotes plant science innovation, where our members are from BASF, Corteva, Syngenta, Bayer, FMC, Sumitomo, that we continue to invest about $6 billion into R&D to bring technology into the hands of farmer every year. But for CropLife Asia, we are globally, we have 91 offices, and in Asia 15, and we continue to work hand in hand with different stakeholders to ensure that we deliver technology into the hands of farmers. Next slide, please. And the vision for us is to ensure that farmers are enabled with the technology that we have and innovate to allow farmers to continue to feed an increasing population. Food security is very important in Asia, and how do we enable true innovative agriculture to ensure safe and secure food throughout Asia Pacific. And you're seeing this more critically over the last 12 months when we had COVID. So next slide, please. So the biological sector, and then Alison, you spoke about just very intensely just now, and then Dr. Zhang also. So year to date, there are about 600 synthetic AIs in the market. But over the last couple of years, we have seen a dramatic increase in the biopesticide has been registered throughout. And then, of course, there's a wide scope in terms of organism, active substance that has been increased. But what in the integral part is the farmers are looking for a more collective or cohesive toolbox that they could deal with pests and diseases. And this goes hand in hand with pest resistance management and also through rotation as they move from different mode of action from the crop protection domain into a biological domain. So this will allow the what you call farmers to continue to have a yield increase possibility, quality improvement, and back to them to today's talking point is traceability of fresh producers. So this will continue to allow the farmers to produce and capture what they have planted in terms of value capture at the end of the day. So next slide, please. This slide shows you a span of from 1962 until 2017, the number of active ingredient of crop protection product that's been registered. And what we show is that over the years, the number of biologics has also increased dramatically over the last couple of years. Of course, we all know BT is the number 1 seller. Today, we have almost 67 BT products in the market, 450 formulation, and contributes for 90 million into the market, depending. And of course, there's other trips, whitefly, Lepidoptera, and different organisms that have been put into biocontrol. So just a span of it that this essentially is the key market is driven by BT. Next slide, please. So again, showing to you where most of the biocontrol is right now is more derived from natural chemical as number 1. Number 2, for pest control is predominantly dominated by insecticide, cidal effect. And then of course, nutrition is more the additive, and then nematicide. So just want to share with you, and also North America seems to be much more developed in terms of market acceptance. And of course, it goes in tandem with their farmers' knowledge and We'll talk about farmer later on because you raised a couple of questions on farmer and education, etc. So that is a core component. How are we going to reach out to a number of extreme number of farmers across Asia Pacific, educate them, and how to bring them on board in adaptation of the technology. Next slide, please. So again, potentially we are seeing biologists increasing more than 10% year on year by 2025. There are different numbers. People say the market could be 3.7. I've seen numbers to about $4.5 billion. But just to share with you, essentially it's a growing market because of different adaptation, and we're coming from a very low what you call position, and therefore you're going to continue to see larger adaptation of the technology. Next slide, please. So this is just a market share. I'm not going to go in detail, but just again, North America has quite the largest market size. Next slide, please. Now going back to the fundamental, you asked a question: is FAW does FAW has a biopesticide solution? Yes, to a certain extent. Dr. Zhang talked about metabolism that was registered, and BT is also one. So there are a spectrum of things that we know about 16 species of entomopathogen that FAW is susceptible to, but nevertheless, there are things that we really need to work on. China was the first one that actually went on registration, but there are other pieces, according to the FAO 2017 report, there needs some more R&D in country, whether it's to find that the both biovar or pathovar efficacy, species specific, that Dr. Zhang also talked about just now. So some of the local developmental work for the industry, what we call developmental work of field trial, needs to happen more on a systematic way, and then on a larger scale to find solutions for the other countries that are currently being impacted by FAW over the last couple of years. Next slide, please. So the challenges, again, we spoke about this just now. You spoke about cost. We need to also learn, from Asia Pacific context, there's tremendous weather patterns, stability, and efficacy on the ground. So farmers are very accustomed to seeing an insect fall off the plant, or just to explain. But therefore, we need to teach them a different methodology through IPM from surveillance. So that's the new thing that we need to teach and reach out to them, how to monitor and also look at threshold, and then when to apply and how to apply. Of course, there are different formulations that is in the market. We also need to them in terms of shelf life stability, and also there are different products that has different, what you call, even for BT, there are different CFU that is in different bottles. So there's a lot of training that needs to be extend to the farmers of how to use it correctly and how do you monitor for efficacy and efficiency on the ground. So still a lot of work ongoing, but we can talk a bit more later. Next slide, please. So the R&D challenge, again, Dr. Zhang did the platform. From an R&D perspective and going to market with the embedded safety requirement, allergy test, and the multivariate, whether it's from shelf life stability, and then etc., there needs a whole lot of investment that the university currently may not have the capability or the funding based on R&D to go to market. So that's why it's a lot of things you're seeing. I've seen people like Trichoderma, for example, is gone from a semi-lab stage to a pilot scale. And then how do we get it upscaled? Whether there's a bioreactor, 100-liter bioreactor available, how do we do packaging? Again, packaging from a crop protection pipeline and a biotech pipeline will be slightly different. Is there a facility for us to go upscale, and does the university wants to upscale it or not? So those are some of the R&D. Yes, we have shown good progress on the ground in the lab, in the report, but going to market is a whole different story altogether. Next slide. So going to market is, you found a good product, it's effective, we can control. Now the next part is, again, Dr. Zhang did hold all the platform is regulation. The major constraint is, are we able to get that data requirement? That's why, for us in the crop protection side, we spend $100 million to get one product from R&D, from the early screening of target all the way to market is for $180 million. That incorporates the registration process, getting the IP, doing all the toxicology studies. So it is not a small amount. And again, Alison, you said just now, can I just have a tank, do myself and grow it up? Yes, but the problem is, if you have contaminant growing it, you're not growing the bacteria that you want, or you're not growing the organism you want. You're going to have a lot of mixture in terms of efficacy, effectiveness, and then losing effective at the day, and then the farmer will have it's at stake for losing his crop, that he will not be able to protect his cultivation by using that pesticide, and he will lose interest and be having a very different image of biopesticide. So that's a watch out. So the other piece is IPR. It's a big constraint. India is one good example. Is the spurious pesticide. A lot of biopesticide is unlegally mixed with active ingredient and therefore selling under biopesticide. But essentially, we will be causing another outbreak later on because of resistance increase, because there are different active ingredients being pumped into a biopesticide, and the farmer doesn't know what is being sprayed onto the plant. So this is the other piece on the IP that we are superly concerned, especially on India regulation. Next slide, please. So India again is one of the best biopesticide regulation. They have taken OECD guideline, evolved, and the PMB 2020 is really currently being tabled in Lok Sabha and due for Parliament review. But nevertheless, it's one of it allows India's biopesticide regulation to further strengthen. And over the last couple of years, GIZ has been the frontier in driving some of the ASEAN guideline on regulation, use, and trade of biological control agents. This is one first initiative that we're trying to get ASEAN countries coming together and says, can we agree on a sort of balance requirement, or how do we register the product in the market? What is the basic requirement? So this is still work in progress, but I'm happy that GIZ took the lead with the support of FAO, and then it is now on the table by various ASEAN countries. To hopefully in the next couple of years, we can see a much more harmonized framework that both even the what they call universities, small stakeholders, and etc., can take their product to market and register for use and benefit the society, the farming community at large. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, US EPA has one of the longest and most stabilized regulation in place. I think that's an opportunity for us to learn either from US EPA and OECD, and allow other countries to jump on board, be able to let products register online, meaning come online and get products registered in a much more scientific way. Going back is again data requirement. What are the data requirements that I can utilize, whether it's biology, efficacy, and stability test that is recognized by the countries that we are selling to? But a lot of people say, oh, how come this product is only registered for China? Because if it's going out from China to another country, it requires a whole lot of different requirements. And then not to forget, because of the sensitivity and biosafety, the safety protocol that that is put in place by various governments. So the whole process will be much more challenging. For example, what you call the Australian regulation for biosafety, Quarantine Act for Biological Control Act, Environment Protection Biodiversity Act. So when you go to market, you have to undergo those type of regulation in order to go to market. Not to forget that a lot of regulations are based currently on the crop protection component. Therefore, a lot of hand-holding with regulators to bring them onto the biopesticide regulatory framework will also need some time. So therefore, for the industry, we are working very closely with regulators to understand and get a flexible framework. Of course, we do a partnership with GIZ, for example, is to get that level of consistency so that we can get a regulatory framework that we can get products into the hands of farmers at much more quicker pace. As a pest and disease comes up, you finish the exploration, know that the efficacy, and how do we get to the registration process rather than take a long time. For across Asia, again, going back to the crop protection, it takes us 13 years to get a product into the market, but ASEAN takes another 7 years for regulatory requirement before a product can be registered. So there's a full 20 years before you even see a product into the market. So a functional, systematic, science-based regulation is going to call for us to help support the farming community. So I'm going to stop here for the moment, and Alison, back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tan, and it's nice that I've brought you back to your student days as well. I think that's a good thing. I hope. But that's kind of interesting in that you've obviously spent a long time, well, maybe not that long because you're still very young, but as a career, what is the real change that you've seen since your university days? Is it as fast as you would have liked to have seen the uptake of biopesticides and biocontrol, for example, or has it been slower?
So I think the conversation we need to separate into two components. One is we tend to say small scale farmer, but from what I've seen for the semi large scale, like I'll give you a good example is Cameron Highland. Cameron Highland, the adaptation of BT was 100% in Cameron Highland in the 1980s. Yeah. Already. So I think that we need to look at the farmer capability, the size of farmer, because it goes back into affordability, and therefore between different group of farming community, we need to have a different communication and a different what we call strategy, or how do we bring them on board and introduce the particular innovation, so to speak. It's not one system for all.
No, that's very insightful. But are there different business models then maybe we should be thinking about with small scale farmers, for example, to be able to adopt some of these technologies that might be required? Because you're saying that if you've got larger scale or semi-large scale, there seems to be, they've got the purchasing power or they've got the ability to work together. Is that something that we need to look at more, do you think?
I don't think it's a business model, but it's more of how do we check on the government machinery. Again, KEDI has a machinery of a lot of partnership, whether it's Myanmar, etc., on the application that they reach out to. The whole extension service, like again, NATAS of China is a good extension format. PPD has a large extension format that you could leverage and be able to explore and go out. So with also various countries are coming up with various, over the last 12 months, you see a lot of government investing or direct cash investment into supporting the agriculture platform. So I think there's both the financial support to make things much more affordable. Yep. Again, pricing is a different story altogether, meaning is that helping the smallholder to get hold of the technology firsthand. And as he increases his productivity, then he can be self-reliant and buy his own product. Maybe that's an opportunity for us to tag on national machinery to introduce certain technology.
Okay, excellent. And so I guess there's a couple of questions related to exactly that. The first one, has the benefit cost ratio of any of the biopesticides recommended for fall armyworm worked out? Is MPV a cost-effective method? There's two questions in there for you.
Sorry, I've not done any social economic review, nor have we gone into that modeling, because as I mentioned to you, when I read through the paper, FAO has still said there needs to be more work to be done to really look at it. And then the whole scaling part is going to be a very different, it's like Dr. Zhang said, scaling up in certain countries in Myanmar or scaling up in Malaysia, because in Malaysia, probably the bioreactors available, I can have 100 liters bioreactor available. I have production facility available for scale up. So that cost will become very different compared to if I were to start up a new manufacturing facility in Myanmar, Cambodia. India is a good example. There are a lot of facilities, the commercial, you can sort of licensing a facility to go and produce, and then you can do your own packaging. So different country will have a different cost structure, so to speak. Thank you.
Yeah. Here's a question. I'm not sure if you know much about the Nagoya Protocol, but is that a big hurdle to overcome for the use of biopesticides and biological control agents?
Yes, the release to environment is very, very challenging. That's why I mentioned to you, when you bring an organism, let's say, you come from New Zealand and you know the whole biosecurity agenda, how do I get to Quarantine Act? How do I get Biocontrol Act, Environment Protection Conservation Act 1992? and those pieces needs to be satisfied, and then also a threat to local indigenous species. So that whole encompasses a different domain altogether.
Yep. Yeah, no, it's a good question. There's another question here. If a product proved toxic by killing beneficials like biological control agents, can it pass through regulation and be registered?
Again, it is based on the local requirement. Once there is criteria for the toxicity, again, Dr. Zhang also spoke about non-target, over-spectrum, non-target organisms. So those part of things has to be evaluated and assessed by each country's fundamental regulation, because everybody have a different set. Yes, we have FAO as a global guideline, but every country has its own science-based criteria for toxicity assessment.
Excellent, thank you. And here's always the big question around, and you sort of talked about this before in quite some depth, but I'm going to ask it again. But it's what are the incentives that farmers could get to encourage them to use biopesticides? Because if it is more expensive than the conventional way, which is more toxic, farmers will still consider that way, given the cost and the economic benefit. Well, what do you think are some of the ways we could incentivize farmers to use?
I think people are very hung up on the cost itself, but at the end of the day, if the biological products are sustainable in the environment, they self-propagate, number one. They will grow because once let's say the bacteriophage will infect a bacteria and then will propagate inside and multiply by itself. So you will have a sort of a baseline over a season. You don't have to consecutively spray it to manage a certain level unless it breaks the threshold of infection. So cost as initial cost is not everything, but it's the whole spectrum of efficacy, have different tools, different seasons. And by having biopesticide, you can also manage a pre-harvest interval. You can really protect your crops to the end before you harvest, as opposed to other chemical, you have to maintain a certain timeline, whether it's 7 days, 3 days, or 14 days, depending on what you apply. So, but with this, you can actually, with surveillance, be able to manage your pest and disease infection.
Yep. So, and actually, maybe there's a question here that I think sort of also gets to what you've just said around emphasising farmer education and implementing conservation biocontrol, actually IPM at the very start. Obviously the basics of crop management from the very start are a very important part of reducing your cost and reducing the use of any pesticides in the future. How important is that sort of good soil, good seed, good sort of crop management? How important is that, do you think, in controlling fall armyworm?
I think everything has its role. And then again, when we talk about pesticide, it's not calendar spraying. I think a lot of people misuse this. Again, it goes back to surveillance. If you see a threshold being crushed, and therefore you implement certain management. So okay, also you need to balance between when you spray a crop protection product and when you're putting a biocontrol. So that education needs to be there. But nevertheless, with a good agriculture practice and IPM, whether it's carbon sequestration, moisture management, these are all part and parcel of the holistic view of why we utilize IPM with crop rotation, and then that will also preserve the, encourage nitrogen at what we call capture using different crop from corn and nitrogen fixation type. So there are various things that we can help farmers to better sustainably use their farmland in a much more holistic manner. This Excellent. Is all the technology that is in place. We need farmers to be able to rotate them.
And on that, I guess you said that biological and synthetic pesticide products are often can be and are often used together within an IPM system. This is something we're looking at in the development of the resistance management work under the ASEAN Action Plan. Do you see there's synergies there with resistance management? The idea even to explore the sort of rotation or the relationship between biologicals and synthetic pesticides?
Definitely, because on one hand, when you have a biologic control, when it exceeds a certain instar, that's why when we do the efficacy test, people don't realize that different crop protection products will target different instar. or different growth cycles. So once your threshold passes or you collapse for a particular insta, you need to use more dramatic chemical to manage the control. Then you can reverse back into biocontrol as part of the ecosystem management, and then reintroduce based on surveillance, good agriculture practice, and IPM. So there is a coexistence of the technology based on spatial and time.
Right, thank you, and that's a great place to leave it. Thank you so much, Dr. Tan. I mean, that was a brilliant presentation, and it's really nice to hear the growth in the industry as well, in this biologicals part of the industry. And I know it's starting from a small share of the marketplace, but it's good it's going in the right direction. So